What's up, fellow nerds? Patch 9.8 is upon us. I am Phreak, and this is the 9.8 patch rundown. Intro done? Whew. Let's get into it. 9.8 is the mid-season invitational patch, which is, of course, a pretty big deal for pro play. It's going to be until like 9.10 or 11 or 12 or something till we go back into the regular season patches. So this is the one that matters for pro. The next few won't matter for pro at all, and then we'll get back into that one later on down the line. But ultimately, MSI is a cool tournament. You should watch it. Let's talk about what's going on in 9.8. Amumu getting some pretty big buffs. He's not doing very well in solo queue. He's certainly not seen in pro at all, and so he's getting buffs. He's getting extra 3% damage on his passive, which is somewhere between a 3% damage buff and, in the impossible situation of your opponents having 9 trillion magic resist, it's a 30% damage buff. Of course, that's unlikely, but that's kind of the world you roughly live in. That's how much damage this is, both for himself and any other magic damage teammates. I actually do like that this is getting buffed. This is a unique Amumu-specific benefit, and I like this getting pushed up to a point where you really care about the passive. Of course, it amplifies his damage, it amplifies teammates' damage. Overall, a positive. This does help you clear jungle camps a little bit faster as well. So that's all pretty nice. The next big thing is 4 to 0 seconds off the Q cooldown. That's a pretty big deal. Here is that table right now. It is 25% off the cooldown for most of the game. I'm choosing to believe that while old Amumu would definitely max Q second for the very substantial cooldown increase, new Amumu might indeed max it last and instead put points into W. Now, that's not for sure true, but if it is, then this is what your sort of numbers look like here. Keep in mind that it doesn't change at all until level 8 when you would first put a point in, to Q or W in this case. But even if you don't put it in, you've still got the first 10, 11 levels where it's still at least the same cooldown. It's only weaker for the sort of mid-game section. Considering junglers don't often hit level 18, you've really got to decide which ability you actually want to max and which one you don't. Level 15 is a pretty reasonable endpoint for a jungler. So, hey, keep that in mind. Do you want 2 seconds longer on your Q cooldown, or do you want to do a lot more damage crying? And I think that's going to be a more reasonable choice. We might see builds change up a little bit. The more points in W, the more you really want to be a tank and just make sure you're getting your tiers off. So could be a thing here. The other thing to care about is that Amumu follows his target for up to a reasonable distance from where he cast Bandage Toss in case they get out of the stun before he arrives. This second part is what trips me up a little bit because I guess if you're facing off against a high tenacity target who like runs away from you, you'll follow longer. But I also feel like this maybe actually tracks people through Arcane Shift. In which case, it's a really big buff to Amumu. You'll follow up to, I don't know, 600, 500, 300, some amount of extra range. I don't know what reasonable actually is, but you might follow your targets a fair bit, which is a positive overall to stickiness. Keep in mind, W and E are melee only. R is very short range or reasonably short range as well. So anything that gets him to his targets better is going to be a very big deal for Amumu. Based on how lax this is could be a gigantic buff for Amumu. Ultimately, this still feels pretty positive. This feels like a good 1%, 1.5%. Depending on how big this is, it could be like as high as 3% buff to Amumu. I doubt that, but that's a possibility. So somewhere in the range of 1 to 3%, I think, is where this buff puts Amumu. According to UGG, he's a 48.4% win rate jungler, so definitely could use the bump up, at least in Plat Plus. Next up is Camille getting a small base attack speed buff. Should help her jungle more than anything else. She's actually reasonably fine overall. As a top laner, she's about 50%. As a jungler, she's quite low, 46. But here is that. It's 3% more attack speed. So she'll hit jungle camps 3% faster. It multiplies hookshot, multiplies everything. 3% more attack speed. Of course, dedicated auto-attacking is a very big deal for taking down jungle monsters. Attack speed means more when you're playing against tanks because you're going to get more of those auto attacks off. It just, in general, is going to mean more there. So, yeah, overall, cool. Solid buff. This definitely should help jungle more than top. Minor buffs in both cases. She'll probably still, I'm going to argue, be too weak to jungle, outside of being really good at Camille. Next up, buffs to Cassiopeia, who kept getting mana cost increase to Q and W max. When looking at her builds most recently, Q max first and the E max second was her most successful build. Just Q for the wave clear, and then you couldn't really afford this mana cost really early on. With the E mana cost going down, I chose to compare Emax first as her build. Do want to point out that the most common build, even if not the most successful build, was indeed Emax first. That's what I'm comparing. Doesn't mean anything level 1 or 2, but eventually down the line, it's a 25% cut to the mana cost, which is quite meaningful. And Cassiopeia isn't in that bad of a spot. 4 to 9.5% win rate, mid lane as far as I can tell. Pretty strong top laner overall. I think we can definitely see Cassiopeia top come back and be more popular. So as we're seeing more and more tank buffs in the top lane, I think Cassiopeia top is completely viable as well. One of the things that does hold Cassiopeia top down a little bit is access to blue buff. It's much harder, especially if you're playing red side Cassiopeia. You're nowhere near your blue buff. Not that you're always going to get it even as blue team, but that's a consideration, of course. Either way, definitely matters here. What's interesting is this is a bigger buff in solo queue than it is in pro, because I trust pros to have good skill orders and people in solo queue don't. And so again, people in solo queue are maxing E first. This helps E max first more than it helps Q max first, which may still be the optimal build. I'm not sure. Next up is Fiora, who's getting half second increase on the slow and stun duration and 20 flat damage on the W, as well as 0 to 20 mana cost off of the E. Fiora overall, definitely in a fairly weak spot overall. 47% win rate top laner, definitely seems to be on the weak side. Definitely good to see Fiora, but she's a cool champion. I like seeing her around. She's definitely very scary, but she can die in team fights. That's not too big of a problem, so I think it's fine that she's getting buffs. And overall, here is the data table for this kind of stuff. So the W damage, of course, you're probably going to max it last. I want to point out the cooldown scales from 24 to 16 seconds. So while you do get 2 seconds off the cooldown per rank, the E cooldown is arguably a better rank up, going from 13 to 5. There's extra damage increase on that as well. A lot of reasons to max your E second. You probably still will, but hey, I want to point out that this is a non-trivial cooldown difference on W if you choose to indeed max it second. Having a 16-second cooldown, 270 damage, 2 second slow ability, when you heavily buff the CC and flat damage in the ability, there is a reason to get cooldown incentives, more and more prioritized in your level up order. So there is a chance that you do this. Yes, E has an increased level up incentive now here as well, but it's not as strong. There is a chance we see Fiora switch to W max second, just for this cooldown difference, just because 160 damage is non-trivial there. But it seems unlikely, but there's a possibility. I want to bring it up because I think it's actually possible. Again, here's the mana cost difference on the E. Matters when you start putting points into it, up to 1/3 off the mana cost. Pretty reasonable there. As I said, 47% win rate top laner. Probably gains, I'm going to say, a solid 2% off this. I feel like this is a really big buff. This isn't a very meaningful. If there is a chance that WMAX second becomes an optimal build, then this win rate might go up even higher because WMAX will do some pretty crazy things. It's up really, really frequently. You're going to often build a Black Cleaver or Trinity Force, so it's going to be pretty low cooldowns on that ability. 20 CDR seems, very likely. So if you drop another 3 seconds off this cooldown, you're at about 13. That's up a lot. That's something to consider. Next up, buffs to Mega Gnar's ultimate. A very substantial 30 to 50 seconds off that cooldown. Gnar has been gaining a pretty substantial amount of power over time. His solo queue win rate is up to 48.7, which is maybe the highest Gnar has ever been. Legitimately. This is actually really, really high win rate for Gnar, who's pretty frequently been a very low solo queue win rate, high pro presence champion. This is a very large cooldown buff. Keep in mind that this cooldown buff doesn't mean as much as you might think because you're locked out of Cascade until you reform into Mega Gnar. But it does help really ensure you've got your Gnar ult up almost every time you transform, especially in late game. It is almost impossible to not have this up every time. Keep in mind, he almost always builds Black Cleaver. So in the real world, it's an 18-second cooldown. I don't know how long Gnar passive lasts. I didn't look that up, but there is a chance you legitimately get in the spot where you can maybe get 2 Gnar ults. I don't know. 18 seconds is wrong. 6 seconds, 24-second cooldown with the Black Cleaver. 18 seconds is the max CDR. Gnar passive does not last 18 seconds, so you can't. But still, this is a fairly substantial buff to Gnar. Again, smaller than it looks on paper, but still a substantial buff. This is going to give him probably a good 1% or more win rate, so Gnar is going to be very close to 50%. If not above after this change. And I keep saying, hey, maybe Gnar's going to be viable now. Every 2 patches, it gets more buffs. I could easily see this being Gnar in pro play. I could easily see Gnar being a pretty popular pick in pro play. The only downside is that Gnar is supposed to be weak to agile fighters, things like Riven and Aurelia and Akali, because they can get onto mini Gnar and deal very substantial damage to that champion. That might be the release lever that keeps it from being played, but if someone ever does blind pick a tank, maybe we see Gnar again. Next up is Jhin. Jhin is one of the more weakly performing marksmen, 43.4 according to UGG, and is going to get some minor buffs here. Now, things to point out, Trap Vision up 1 minute is pretty nice. That's definitely some extra control, playing around Baron Pit, keeping your brushes warded, things like that. This can definitely matter. Want to point out that at least it used to be common. It might still be, but we don't see much Jhin in pro play, so it's hard to fact check this. People often used to leave E until like level 8 and sometimes even level 13 for your first point. That they just simply would not rank E because the W level incentive was so good and E was so unreliable. The trap duration going up by 50% is enough to make you reconsider that, even if rank 1 of the ability is the exact same cooldown, exact same damage, only the duration is up. Also keep in mind that the traps that you spawn on kill or assist, as long as you get a point, the cooldown here is also irrelevant. Kind of keep that one in mind as well. Ultimately, what this comes down to is there is a chance, though I think it's incredibly close to 0, that you max E second because the level up incentive got better. Here is that table right here. It's substantially better at high ranks. 24 becomes 16. That is 1/3 off the cooldown. But again, you would have to actually max E second. The W level incentive is 1 second of root and 140 damage. The E level incentive is 240 damage, and instead of a 4-second cooldown, a 12-second cooldown. So even though the damage incentive is better and the cooldown incentive is better, W gives you a full 1 extra second of crowd control. That's a pretty substantial level up incentive. There is still a chance you do max E second. There is a chance that you really care about the wave clear and your team has enough crowd control that the traps blowing up really matters. There is some sort of chance here that you play follow-up Jhin instead of initiator Jhin, and indeed you care about getting 240 extra damage on the E and your cooldown dropped by 12 seconds. There is a chance that you really care about that. I just think it's very unlikely. It's hard for me to envision dropping your W level incentive. But maybe. Maybe it's really good. We'll see stats midway through the week, and we'll see what happens. People will try this. It's probably wrong, but we'll see. Again, this buff by itself means very, very little if there is no C change, because this only matters at levels 14 and onwards. This is a very minor buff again, so that's not very much. Next up, though, is a big change to Jhin. It does 1 to 3.5x to 1 to 4x based on missing health. Now, on paper, this doesn't look very large. However, it's actually really substantial. Here is missing health value on your target and how much damage R deals. At a pretty paltry half HP, it is a 10% flat and ratio damage buff on the R. That is meaningful. That is a substantial uptick in damage. That is meaningful. And what's really interesting, unless I'm really trolling here, and I don't think I am, I'm pretty sure I'm doing my math correctly in this case, you actually get most of the benefits of this buff at like 1/4 missing health. Like 4x instead of 3.5x is only 40% damage bump, but 2.2 instead of 2 is a 10% damage bump. So you actually get a lot of your gains pretty early on around this point, that even if their health bar is down a little bit at all, like even if they're down 20%, they're at 80% HP, it's still a 7% damage bump. And I'm pretty sure I'm not doing the math wrong here. Like it like shocks me a bit, but you're getting a lot of your gains pretty quickly. So this is an all-around good buff to the R. This is I think bigger than it looks on paper because it's this. This is substantial. Jhin could gain a lot here. Jhin should be a high win rate champion. Jhin should be very good in solo queue, and I think we have reasons to see Jhin in pro play as well, especially with how much we are seeing a lot of assassin and fighter-based compositions. Having a more supportive bot lane marksman is going to be totally fine to throw out the R, to throw out the W, to bring in the crowd control for the Cassiopeias and the Aurelias and the Kindreds and everyone else who's running around dealing a lot of damage for your team. and you just need to help them out a little bit. The one thing Jhin does not have is backline access. Ezreal ult goes over the top, hits everyone. Jhin does not do that, so he doesn't quite help Assassination in that regard, but he's still a good supportive champion to help the rest of your carries do well. Should be viable in pro. Next up, nerfs to Kayle, who really needs it. 53% win rate top laner. Even after the nerfs, she is still seen in pro play. She is indeed a very strong champion. So she's losing 2 attack damage, 2 armor, and a little bit of her attack speed ratio. Also, Ascensions are now based on Kayle's level and not skill points, so rip to Kleptomancy Kayle. That matters a lot as well. Keep in mind that Klepto was her highest win rate keystone. Some of that is, of course, Klepto is good with her playstyle. Some of that is getting your Ascensions early matters. This will obviously nerf Kleptomancy as her best keystone. It is likely something else like Grasp or Comet or Lethal Tempo or something else. Maybe Fleet. We'll see. Fleet was around there a little bit. If you run Fleet Kayle, this doesn't matter. If you run other keystones on Kayle, this doesn't matter. But again, they were not as good as Klepto Kayle. This is an overall win rate nerf. And keep in mind, plenty of people don't reach patch notes, and they will still run Klepto, even if Klepto is trash. I also don't think Klepto is trash on Kayle. I think it still fits her combat pattern, and she's still happy to pick up all those things. It is not necessarily a bad choice to have Kleptomancy on this champion. Just really want it to be known that, hey, that's going to go away as probably the optimal build. It'll probably still be viable. Anyway, let's go on to what these changes actually mean for the champion. Here we are. It is, by the way, here's the attack speed effectiveness, 96% attack speed effectiveness. So that is what this change means. This number is what bonus attack speed used to calculate its effectiveness, not Kayle's actual attack speed. Yeah, so basically the way this works is there is a internal base attack speed, and then a lot of champions have a modified level 1 attack speed so that they can essentially feel like the right amount of fast or slow at level 1. But attack speed growth and item pickups multiply this number. So her level 1 attack speed won't be any different. She'll essentially have essentially 4% bonus attack speed at level 1 so that she still attacks this fast. But she will scale as though that's her number. That's basically how that works. So she won't feel any different level 1. She will scale a little bit less off attack speed purchases. Again, to the tune of about 4%. Anyway, here is her losing 2 armor. 28 to 79 becomes 26 to 77. Her physical durability is down, 1 to 2%. Really not a big deal. Still cool to see this. Coincidental note, this lines up very closely to my, here's what I think a champion should have as their base stats. It's now off 1 armor from my, this is what I think should be true. Overall, though, her losing 2 attack damage, rounding in the fact that her E is indeed a thing, and people are maxing it first still, most commonly. It's not her highest win rate build anymore, but it is her most frequent build, so I'm assuming that that's just going to stay true. Here is how much damage that she actually deals. Wait, I actually didn't roll this in. Am I trolling? I maybe didn't roll the actual numbers in. Okay, I'm an idiot and just rolled in flat attack damage. Here is her old and new E damage, though. It's not really different. All right, whatever, who cares? Either way, 2 attack damage is not a very big deal. Maybe I didn't actually do the numbers here. Maybe I didn't actually do the numbers here. Ignore this. Here's the damage difference. It's not that big of a deal. 2 AD, not massive. 3 to 2%. Still scales up to a decent number at 93 there. Yeah, she's fine. Ultimately, these nerfs are not that big. 2 attack damage and 2 armor. 5% or 4% attack speed. Those all exist. They all mean something. This is probably going to be a solid 1 to 2% win rate. This might be maybe 0.5% win rate. I think our other keystones are pretty close. Overall, I think Kayle will still be above a 50% win rate champion in solo queue. That's where she'll end up. Pro viable, I think, is still true, actually. I think Kayle's always been pro viable since day 1. Just very slowly, teams are learning her. Think about how stupid strong Kayle was 3 patches ago, and no teams played her. Kayle's going to be in this form and still be viable at MSI. Just, really want to point that out there. Next up, buffs to Blue Kayn. E Shadow Assassin cooldown is decreased a lot, from 21 to 13 down to a flat 8. Massive cooldown difference. Now keep in mind, of course, like for the first like 6 to 8 levels to 10 levels, you're not going to get your evolve. I don't remember what average level Kayn gets his evolve at. I really don't know. So I couldn't tell you for sure, but considering you max his ability last, and you will now definitely max it last, even up through level 13, it's still this massive 62% cooldown cut. That is gigantic. E's cooldown is a pretty big deal because it lets you E into a fight for 8 seconds, or obviously much less in the real world based on CDR with Warrior and other things coming in, Duskblade, etc. So you can E back out pretty easily. This is a pretty big deal. Kayn's overall win rate actually a bit low, 48.8 according to UGG. So yeah, definitely deserving of buffs. I know that Riot does track internally blue Kayn versus red Kayn, and blue Kayn is still the far weaker build. That's why there's blue Kayn specific buffs. That's cool. I'm glad to see that happening. Good to see things continue to tune upwards and upwards. And of course, with blue Kayn getting buffed, that will buff the average Kayn win rate as well. So he'll gain quite a bit here. I think yeah, Kayn approaches 50% win rate with a buff like this. This is really, really nice. It's not absurdly massive, but it's a really nice buff and probably appropriately sized for Kayn's power level. Nice little minor buff to Master Yi. He is getting, oh baby, ghosting during the R. Now, interesting to note, he is actually a pretty high win rate solo queue jungler. At least in Plat Plus, he's doing pretty well overall. So, I don't know, interesting to see that, like, he's actually winning quite a lot of games, and I'm a little surprised to see a buff because of this, but either way, it is cool to see, like, the modernization of, like, yeah, he probably should be ghosted during ult. I think it actually makes sense to do this. I think it is a good design change overall, but actually really does seem to be plenty strong, so maybe he's going to be terrible. It's not like a giant buff, to keep in mind. Like, it's really not a very big deal. This matters a little bit, but keep in mind he blinks every 3 seconds anyway and bypasses minions in that regard, so it's not massive. This will matter some, but not a ton. Either way, he will remain a very strong jungler overall. Next up is Nautilus, gaining basically a quarter second on the root at all times, and 20 to 40 damage on Dredge line is pretty meaningful. Nautilus' most common role is at support, where he is still sub 50% win rate, 48 and a quarter. So pretty big buffs here. Do want to point out that continually, these are buffs that tend to help lower level Nautiluses more, right? A quarter second arguably means more when your root is only half a second long, and then it means when your root is a second and a quarter long, and people have started to build up tenacity. Not only percentage, but an actual gameplay impact. So this means quite a lot for the early game for him. Will mean a lot for his early game ganks as well, where the CC is really, really meaningful. So this helps, I would say, jungle and support Nautilus the most. Q damage up by 20 is pretty nice. You're seeing the most common build for him is maxing it last. And so here is the data table. 25 to 17% bonus damage is pretty nice. Do want to point out that part of Nautilus's win rate is heavily deflated by the fact that people are not maxing E first. A very substantial portion of Nautilus players are not maxing E first. E is his best level incentive by far, and his win rate is actually massive on Emax. It's like 52% on Emax and like 48% on his other builds. That's like across roles. So Nautilus might actually just be sleeper OP, and the stats are lying to you because of bad build orders. I think Nautilus support is probably, at least after these changes, totally viable, and there's a decent chance he actually takes over. I'm going to put there to be a decent chance that Nautilus support might be the best support in League of Legends this patch. I mean that. If I get filled support this patch, I will start playing Nautilus. I will probably do pretty well, even though I'm bad at tanks. I think this champion is super duper strong. That is my opinion. We'll see if it's true. Please max E first. Q max second is going to be, I think, really worth doing, considering these extra buffs to the damage output here are quite meaningful. Not only is the level incentive worthwhile to get 40 more damage out of it, but getting a lower cooldown on an ability with this much damage is really worthwhile. It's a lot of upfront damage. That matters a lot, for getting kills. I realize light, this ability power ratio is higher. That's basically a 20% increased ability power ratio, 0.15. It doesn't matter that much. I don't think we're going to see AP Nautilus, to be honest, but if we do, there's more support for it, I guess. I don't think it's going to be a thing. Whatever. Next up, buffs to Ornn. I think it's actually pretty cool. They're buffing the Ornn tank items. I actually think this is actually a pretty clever way of buffing him. Because I do think conceptually it is correct for Ornn to feel really good about forging items. Sunfire Cape, Abyssal Mask, and Iceborne Gauntlet are all things that he really loves to buy. Of course, you can pick 2 to upgrade, and he's getting either 125 health and 10 armor, or 200 health and 10 MR, or 30 armor. These are all worth 500 to 600 extra gold worth of stats. Considering he's getting 2 of them, he's getting about 1,000 gold worth of stats as a result of these buffs. Once it's level 13, above and beyond the things he was already getting, because those items are already worth about 1,000 extra gold apiece. This means that Ornn really spikes at level 13. And it means that you really need to make sure you're buying 2 of these items. It is now vitally important, even more so than before. It's kind of unfortunate that means Ornn really has to buy these items now because there's only so many tank upgrades. It's really just these, and so he has to pick 2. That's a little unlucky that you do lose some choice, but I still like the idea that it really powers up the forging fantasy, and I think that's really cool. Top Ornn right now is a 47.5% win rate champion. Support Ornn is a 42% win rate champion. Oh boy, don't play that in solo queue. Yeah, definitely has room to be buffed. We've seen him in pro a very little bit. He is somewhat pro viable. This seems like a pretty sizable buff. I really feel like this is probably a good. I'm gonna say 1 to 2. Yeah, it's hard for me to say because I don't know how to contextualize a buff that only matters levels 13 and onward. The buff is really big, but it only matters levels 13 and onward. So it's hard for me to say exactly how big this is. It is really big, which makes you want to say 2% win rate, but it's also level 13 onwards only, which makes you want to say 1% or less. We've had buffs like this where it's in such a specific scenario that it just doesn't affect the champion in any meaningful way. But I think this is going to be pretty nice. This should be a good buff to Ornn. That's nice to see. Next up is a change I'm excited about. I'm excited to bring up is what I wanted to say. Okay, so Renekton is a 48.5% win rate champion in top lane. Could use some buffs. So the health got rounded to the nearest 5. Actually, rounded up to the nearest 5. Attack speed growth became a clean 2 3/4. And the armor growth got rounded up to have no decimal. How do you think I feel about these changes? The first thing is they're actually useless, but I do love that the numbers are getting rounded, right? That's cool. I don't actually think a fighter needs a full 4 armor growth. I think that's actually a bit high for what I think should need to happen in League of Legends. I actually would have preferred they kept 3.8 and instead increased health growth. This is just mostly from me looking at my big base stat chart and being actually fighters don't need this much armor, but really minor. Ultimately, here's the actual difference, and this is kind of really worth pointing out, right? Is okay, we're rounding a bunch of numbers. What does it actually matter for League of Legends? Well, it's 0.5 to 0.1% more health. The armor percent, multiplying in with the health going up and multiplying with the armor growth, your armor is up to 3 higher, which is 1.8% more physical durability at level 18. To go to your 0.5% more overall durability at level 1. Your attack speed growth being up by 0.1% means it goes up by 1.7% of additive attack speed, which is 1.2% more attacks per second. These don't mean anything. I love that this is getting rounded. I love that that is happening. I truly do love that that is happening. But man, is this meaningless. It really is meaningless. In actual gameplay impact terms, it means nothing. But I love that it happened. That's all I really want to say. Okay, that's fine. And Renekton's overall base stats are fine. He gets decent health growth. He's appropriately durable for a fighter. It's fine. This isn't a problem. The actual buffs are the fact that his Q healing is against champions 33% stronger than before. It's a flat 1/3 buff. Healing versus champions, empowered healing versus champions, empowered healing cap, all buffed up by 1/3. That's where the real buffs come in. Q sustain, pretty meaningful there. Renekton is, again, a low win rate top laner, could use the help. And so he's getting the help, and that's a good thing. I think he probably still sits sub 50, but good to see buffs on a weak champion. I love it. And again, I love the designer said, you know what? While we're here, let's round up some numbers. Do love that. Great. Next up is Sejuani getting pretty substantial buffs to her max health ratio on the W. As far as solo queue is concerned, she is 47 3/4 win rate, so definitely could use the help. And yeah, it's actually pretty substantial. So here is this data table. Here's the base damage. That doesn't change, 50 to 230 if you hit both halves of the W. Here is the health damage coming in, and here is the overall damage, 13% roughly, which troughs down to about 8% as you max out the ability, and the base damage does more of the heavy lifting. But the health ratio is overall 33% higher. Of course, she is going to build Cinderhulk. She is going to build more health items like a Knight's Vow. After her Stone Plate, she's going to build her Warmogs eventually down the line. So 33% more damage coming from the health ratio. Do want to point out again, this is a champion with very, very, very high health growth. You look at the W, and still the majority of the damage on this ability is coming from the base damage. That just by leveling up and existing, it has this much damage. And if you bought another 2,000 something health, which is a lot of extra health to buy, you're getting another 47 damage on the ability, which is not trivial. It's not zero. This 13% damage buff becomes a 26% damage buff when you're getting really, really big in a late game. And 26% more damage is a lot of damage, don't get me wrong. It's meaningful. This is a high damage ability, getting a lot of extra damage. Don't let me sell this one too short. This is nice. This will definitely gain her some power. Again, fairly low win rate in solo queue. Not seen in pro very much. Could stand to use some small buffs. Into the tank meta we go. Cinderhulk burns down jungle camps faster. All good things there. Sejuani looks like she's probably going to be the front runner of tank junglers here, and that's fine, I guess. I actually like her more than Jarvan overall in pro. I think we see too much Cinderhulk Jarvan. I think Cinderhulk Jarvan is almost always wrong. Unless you get really checkmated in draft, and you're like, ah, crap, we have to do this now. My opinion. Next up is Singed. Of course, Darksteel got nerfed, which hurt him quite a bit. Singed is typically a very high win rate top laner because he's mostly played by Singed experts. That tends to be where he stands. But he is at 48.5, which is fairly low, especially for him. Singed, by the way, is another champion that I think, I've brought this up before, is a champ that can comfortably sit above 50% win rate, and it's fine for League of Legends. He is fairly low pick rate. He's mostly high mastery players only. He does cool, unique things. He's usually not oppressive in pro. Like, if all champs sit at 50, you have champs that are just frustrating all the time, like Zoe, and Akali and Aurelia, who like maybe just aren't allowed to sit at 50 for like League to be fun for everyone else. And so sometimes have to be below 50, some must, by virtue of that, be above. And I think Singed is one of those champions who's allowed to sit in like the top quartile, and it's fine. Opinion, just opinion. So, base health regen up by 1.5, Mega Adhesive Slow up by 20%, Fling at mana cost down 20 to 40. Is a champion who only needs about 1.5 to 2% win rate to be, I think, at a healthy spot overall in League of Legends. Here is this. So a champion affected by Mega Adhesive runs 2/3 as fast as before because they go from having 60% to 40% of their movement speed. Ergo, they run 2/3 as fast. Overall health regen, pretty substantial buff, 90% in the early game, down to 9% in the late game. Singed outside of Righteous Glory. Well, I guess I'll point out that if you buy things like Righteous Glory, it flatly multiplies your health regen. But Singed's best rune page and best build path, in my opinion, from what I've seen, is actually Dark Harvest into, just going down the line, of course, in the Domination Tree and getting yourself the lifesteal one. Like you got Taste of Blood, And my brain's going to work pretty soon. Ravenous Hunter is the name of that rune. So typically, I think Singed does spec into regeneration talents. So the value of regen is down slightly. But overall, I would say this still matters quite a bit. Getting through the laning phase is really, really quite nice. As always, I do health regen per minute because I think it's actually digestible as far as the numbers are concerned. And he's getting about 20 more health per minute, which is pretty meaningful. Cool beans. Mana cost down by about a quarter on the E, really meaningful as well. If you are able to play your lane more aggressively and spam flings, you really do feel the constraints on your mana pool. This is really substantial. This means a lot. You will burn a lot of mana on Fling if you're able to trade aggressively. This is a ton of early buffs to Singed. I think this is a very, very massive buff. I think Singed catapults himself to well over 50% win rate. Singed is back, IMO. This is, I think, really meaningful. I think this is really meaningful for the champion. Next up, more buffs to Trundle. I actually do love just how many different rounds of minor buffs to Trundle keep happening. He is overall best served in the jungle. He is a 48% win rate jungler. He is far worse everywhere else. He has still not gotten his Pillar CC back. That's what first removed him from pro play, was making you max Pillar first to be useful at all, and rank 1 being garbage. But they're like, nope. Trundle is a fighter. Trundle deals damage. We're playing around Trundle being a damage champion and an off-tank siphoning stats. And I actually think those are more, I guess, interesting gameplay than his E, although his E is a very unique output. So it hurts me a little bit to not see E be a bit more valuable. Kinda whatever. I don't know. I guess what I want to say is, if Trundle is good because of his E, he is a really boring champion. If the E is why he's good, Trundle's gameplay design is garbage. He is one of the worst designed champs in League of Legends if he's only good because of his E. So I think it's actually good the designers aren't buffing his E. I really believe that. I really, really think that's true. That, yes, they could bring him back in pro by buffing his E, but then he'd be a pro-only champion. So I'm really glad they're buffing things that buff his solo queue meaningfully, and then say, hey, maybe he'll go back and pro with this, maybe with this, maybe with this. Also, anytime we do get into a farming tank meta, then Trundle comes back. Because right now we're in a world where the only tanks people run are Cinderhulk Jarvan and Tahm Kench. And those champs don't have the stats worth subjugating. They just don't. There's just not enough stats there to make Trundle great. But as soon as you've got like Sejuani running back around with her passive stacked up and ready to go, as soon as you've got Ornn and Maokai and Nautilus running around in the top lane, boom, you are kind of back in action there, and subjugate means a lot more, and that is kind of what he is waiting for, essentially. When that metagame happens, he's going to be gaining a lot of power because subjugate's going to be doing more for him. Overall, here's the gains we've got, right? 0 to 20 damage on the R, flat, or on the Q, flat 10 seconds off the R. Here is that right here. Up to about 8% more damage on the Q. Of course, the more attack damage you buy, the less this matters. This is a flat damage buff overall for the ability. You're going to go back to maxing Q first, which never really went away. Was always one of the top builds, was always the most common build, but you're still going to max Q first, of course. Your R cooldown down a solid 9 to 14%. Matters a fair bit. I will say having a low cooldown R really does help top lane especially. Top lane Trundle, the lower this cooldown gets, the more he's like, well, we're laning, R, run. Like, you're just going to, like, pillar R, W, I guess pillar W, R, run at them, fight. And the shorter this cooldown is, the more you can, like, burn your ult to fight them, force the recall, and then have the ult back again and fight them the second time without TP. This actually means a fair bit for his top lane fighting overall. Is also, when it's down to 60 seconds down here, and you've got at least 20 CDR from something in your build, and probably 30 because you're going Cleaver or Triforce or Iceborne, plus Visage is 30 CDR straight up. You're not going to run CDR in runes, but you're already at 30 right there. Maybe you even run Righteous Glory. I'm not sure. That probably seems weird, but it's possible. I think Righteous Glory, Jungle Trundle might be viable, to be honest. Whatever. Too much theory crafting. Regardless, this is actually pretty meaningful because Once you get this down to like 40 seconds or something with, like that would be like 33 CDRs, 40 seconds here. You've got the ability to just like ult someone in lane, and it's probably still up for the next team fight. This kind of uptime means a lot. So yeah, I think it's a pretty big meaningful buff to Trundle. He will probably still stay sub 50. These buffs aren't big enough to be a 2% win rate bump, but he's getting closer and closer and closer, and I'm honestly really happy we have our monthly Trundle buffs to get him closer. I actually love that this sort of automated suite of, hey, these champs are weak, give them buffs, these champs are OP, give them nerfs. Like, I am really loving the output of this because we're getting a lot of changes that get the game a lot closer. I really am loving this. We're getting like sort of a lot of meat to chew on every patch. Speaking of a lot of meat, we're down to the last champion change. Zed getting 10 damage off the Q and 2 to 0 seconds off the W. I'm glad we're getting rid of the decimals, just in general. Zed overall is a 52.5% win rate mid laner. In Plat Plus, definitely is a strong performer, could really use the nerfs. An effective top laner as well. Even an effective farming bot laner for what that's worth. So hey, definitely OP. Definitely could use the nerfs. So here's the flat 10 damage down, 11 to 4%. Here's the W cooldown, 10% for most of the game. Eventually the same thing. Yeah, this is a pretty solid nerf overall. This is probably to the tune of a good 1.5%. He'll probably stay above 50%, but good to see these nerfs. Zed definitely a bit overtuned. Good to see nerfs to overtuned champions. Next up, Bilgewater Cutlass going up by 100 gold. Blade of the Rune King doing the same, but Gunblade not losing that, just getting it in the combined cost. Technically, this is still a nerf to Gunblade champions because they're still nerfed getting to Cutlass. Just not the end of the world overall. Blade of the Rune King, of course, is a straight nerf as well. Essentially, they're saying that these items are a little bit overtuned. This was a buff back in the middle of 2018. Yeah, the discount price has made it too valuable marks, and I actually agree. I actually agree that like pro play is actually being dominated by Rune King marksman. If you notice, I think for the most part, right? Like Varus is top tier, Lucian is still top tier, Callista is top tier. Like we see occasional Jinx, we see some Sivir, we see some Ashe, but Rune King is indeed crowding out the other champions. I think that's actually true. I think it's reasonable, and also keep in mind like Rune King is absurdly efficient. Right, like here is it compared before and after. When I put out right here. The on-hit damage, so discounting the active entirely, putting 0 value on the active. For this item to be gold efficient in its components, you hit 500 in the old version, or 573 current health in the new version, for this item to be equal on gold efficiency. And in fact, that's underselling it slightly, because the on-hit damage for this item actually lifesteals, unlike other on-hits. Other on-hits don't lifesteal, this one does. Plus you get the active slow haste, plus the build path is silky smooth. This item is very, very good. Now, of course, yes, finalized 3,000 gold items should be exceptionally efficient. They should be. They should be extremely efficient. That is true. That I'll give you. But it's still very efficient. Right? Hitting 500 health is not hard for Blade of the Rune King. So, yeah, I think it's fine to see this nerf. I think it's reasonable. Rune King is still going to be viable. It's fine. It's fine. Next up, a small buff to Bramble Vest. The Grievous Wounds duration buffed by 2 seconds. That's good. I guess it's because it's now with Thornmail. Cool. Whatever. There's a different debate to be had on Grievous Wounds as a concept. I'm not certain it's right for League of Legends. But whatever. This doesn't mean all that much. Ultimately, it's kind of whatever. I don't think this has a lot of gameplay impact. But okay. Cinderhulk didn't actually get the fix. This actually was hot fixed a couple of days ago, I believe. This actually did come into the game late during 9.7, I believe. I could be wrong about that. I might have been reading that it was getting hot fixed into 9.8 because they realized late in the patch, like, oh, we never actually fixed it. And then, like, hot fixed the patch that's outgoing to include this buff. That might have been what I actually saw. Either way, this is, of course, worth having. This is the tank jungle buff that people, like, are looking at for MSI. Definitely meaningful here. I still think it makes Cinder Hulk Jarvan the wrong build for Jarvan. But hey, good to see this buff. I think tank junglers do need the help slightly, so that's just fine. Next up is a Stormrazor buff. Energize effects increased by a further 5%. And the slow, that's hard to read. A 1 with a cross through it into a line break. 1 becomes 1.5 seconds. So more energized buff, longer slow. Now, in the previous buff to Stormrazor, I sold this item short. I didn't do the math. That's on me. I was a dum-dum. This seems like a really good item. Like, this is the old Stormrazor. From 9.7, 9.6, 9.5, 9.4. I think it's about when it changed. That's a reasonably efficient item. You're only paying 250 gold for a slow, some on-hit damage, something you didn't build a Shiv yet, and the ability to multiply your other things like rapid fire cannon, static Shiv, fleet footwork. This is a very good item. I should have done this math when I did the previous patch. That's my bad. This item is totally viable. You're not getting crit chance on it, but getting this much attack damage is essentially as good as getting crit chance. Because your damage on attack, your estimated damage on attack is going to be about the same. Someone else told me they did some napkin math and that Stormrazor 3rd was actually optimal over a second Zeal upgrade when that previous patch hit. With this buff, I'm even more confident that's true. And with the Energize giving an even larger buff of 35%, the slow being even heavier, the slow lasting even longer, I am going to spam the crap out of IE Shiv Stormrazor and just slowing the entire enemy team for a lot of extra damage for a fairly long time. This feels really good. I think Stormrazor is a very, very strong item. I think this item being this intrinsically powerful means, yeah, it's fine to build first on Kai'Sa. I think it's still viable to go BF pickaxe and do Rage Blade IE. I think that's still a fine build for her. But yeah, Stormrazor first, of course, slightly stronger. Stormrazor first, even just by itself, a viable item. This is a reasonable gold efficiency for this item. You're allowed to buy Stormrazor first now. This seems like a reasonable purchase, honestly. Unless I'm doing something wrong in the math, I don't think I am. This is a fine item. I think you should buy Stormrazor more. There's the Thorn Mail being 3 seconds long. There we go. Cool. I'm pretty sure this matches the Morellonomicon Grievous Wounds of 3 seconds. I think that's what that's about. But this is, kind of nice. It really doesn't mean that much because, again, if someone's attacking you to lifesteal you, the 1 second is enough. It's just the 2 seconds of follow-through afterwards that, affects Mundo's healing as he walks away. Or if someone switches targets, there is some level of power up here, which is not that it's not that big. It's not going to change my item purchases, really. Next up, let's move forward. Coup de Grace getting some extra changes. No longer gives the adaptive force. Instead, slightly more bonus damage when low. I actually like this change design-wise. I actually really would prefer if all these runes, Coup de Grace and Giant Slayer and whatnot, Last Stand, if they all got more normalized, this one randomly has this benefit on it. But if they all just had sort of roughly similar damage amps and they just sort of picked their different criteria for why one thing is good and one thing is not, that becomes compelling. I actually really liked the apples to apples comparison we had in the Domination tree, where you had Zombie Ward and Ghost Pour and Eyeball Collector all give the exact same stats, but they stacked differently and did slightly different things. I thought that was great. I thought that was a really good change from the previous patch. I think these runes all giving a more easy comparison across them is a positive as well. The more we can do that, I think the better that is. I really enjoy that. I would actually like to see more rejiggering of the rune trees to have this kind of effect happen more. What if, Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm and Water Walking were all in the same tier? And it was yes, we all give you bonus attack damage. Choose how and when. When I'm healthy, when I'm in the river, and when I'm in the late game, right? Okay, choose when you get your stats. I think that's cool. I think that's a positive. I think Second Wind versus bone plating versus, I know it's not in the same tier, but conditioning is, at least I'm pretty sure it's not the same tier. Maybe I'm trolling and it is. But like, I think that's a cool place to like, choose how you get extra durability. Regen by getting poked, durability from getting bursted, or hold on to late game and get stats, right? Like, I think the more similar the runes are, while having a very obvious if statement difference, but the then is kind of similar. I think that's cool. So I like this kind of change to coup de grace. The ifs are all very different. Are they low? Are you low? Are they healthy? Well, then, damage amp. And it just simply asks you, what's the game state? Are you low? Are they low? Or are they tanky? That, I think, is great. And this like extra bribe, I don't think needs to happen. I'm glad these runes are getting rechanged. One thing I have been seeing on Reddit comments, they make like a little aside here, is there's a whole bunch of comments of like, wow, Riot just keeps nerfing all the runes. I don't think that's true. It might be true. I'm going to probably do a video at some point and actually go through all the rune changes since preseason 2018 and actually nail down, were nerfs or buffs actually more prevalent to runes overall? I'm curious about that. We're going to see what happens. Anyway, that's it for the base changes of the game. There are changes to ARAM. They're big enough that I want to cover them. I actually do like playing me some ARAM. So we're back to Howling Abyss. The Ghost Walkers and Mariner's Vengeance are gone. Mariner's Vengeance was the fake Guardian Angel. Ghost Walkers was the Goes Through the Walls. Warmogs will, however, keep doing the missing health regen. Backtrack goes back away. I'm assuming Barrier is staying. Maybe it's not. That wasn't clear. The rune timing adjustments will stay. That's a good thing. I think that's a positive. Good. Rebalancing runes to be more appropriate is cool. I like that. Bans will not be staying in ARAM, but the balance changes will. And the balance changes are getting champions closer and closer to viability. I do kind of enjoy like getting in a game a little bit faster. Bans didn't matter much to me. I just banned Sona every game, but if Sona's getting nerfed, then who really cares? Game pacing changes are getting alleviated slightly. Essentially, minions move faster, a bit more slowly. Champs do bonus damage to turrets, a bit more slowly. Poke reduction getting loosened up a little bit. Balance changes still happening. Here's new nerfs. Here's new buffs. Cool. Nice to see that. Bunch of bug fixes. I don't believe these matter very much. Galaxy Slayers, that looks cool. KDA Prestige Evelyn looks cool. The freaking IG skins look super sick. I'm excited for that as well. All right. 52:20 in the video. Time for the TLDR. 9.8 is the MSI patch. And there are lots of changes. Amumu was too weak. I think it's a cool change. You basically 3% more damage on your passive is nice. You might max Q last, which actually is a big buff to, I would say, tank Amumu. Because if you max Q last, you put points in W, which means you just want to be a tank and get your cry on. And so Depeche Mode is happy, and so are Amumu players. This should be pretty solid. Amumu will gain a fair bit. Camille going to gain about 4% overall attack speed. Going to be a slightly better jungler, still overall weak for solo queue. Might be seen in pro. Cassiopeia getting an E mana cost buff, which means quite a lot. In the current day, Q max into E max was the optimal build. Looks like we might be going back to E max first, which is the more common build. This will be a pretty big win rate bump, and Cassiopeia is going to enjoy that quite a lot. I think she's a totally viable champion as a result. Riposte getting half a second on the slow and stun and 20 seconds or 20 extra damage on the ability. That's really meaningful. You actually might see W max second on Fiora as a result. There's an outside chance, I'm not sure, but there's a decent chance you do see it. E rank up kind of nice as well. Fiora really needs the buffs. I don't believe these buffs are big enough to bring her up to great in solo queue, but it's a good first step. This is a pretty big buff to Gnar, but keep in mind you're still gated by actually transforming into Mega Gnar. But Gnar is on the cusp of 50% win rate in solo queue, so I think he's like really almost there, and we might start seeing some Gnar in solo queue and pro play as a result. Jhin has a reason to maybe max E second. I don't think it's going to happen, but there is a small chance it does, especially if the rest of your team has a lot of CC. E does deal a lot of damage. If it blows up, it's absurd damage, and the traps lasting for longer and cooling down more quickly, there is a chance you get this to happen. I'm not sure if it will, but maybe. R's damage is actually meaningful. It's a 10% damage amp in most cases. This means quite a bit. Next up, minor nerfs to Kayle. She is absurdly powerful and will remain on the strong side overall. still strong, still viable, still worth playing. Kleptomancy getting nerfed very, very heavily, as no longer will Elixir of Skill make you evolve sooner. That's a big deal. Klepto will probably still be viable, probably not the top rune. Kayle will probably still sit just above 50%, but not that far above. Probably stops being OP, just strong. Next up is Kayn. Blue Kayn getting pretty substantial buffs to his E cooldown. You do max it last, so a very, very big buff. 21 becomes 8 seconds. This will take some time for players to learn how to play around and abuse this most effectively. I expect to be somewhat of a tail of growth to the Kayn buffs, that he will gain more run rate as time goes on over the patch, but this seems really nice. Next up, Master Yi, already pretty strong, honestly, but he will ghost through units, which is going to be powerful. Next up, pretty big buffs to Nautilus. This might bump him over 50% win rate. He's at about 48% as a support, and these buffs do seem meaningful. I do want to point out that a lot of people are idiots and are not maxing E first. You should max E first. If you do that, you'll have a lot better time playing the game. Really big buffs to Ornn's foraging tank items. This can make double tank a bit more viable, of course. What's nice, by the way, is it's not that your teammate has to be high level, it's you have to be high level. So Ornn can be top lane Ornn. You can have like a support Taric or something, and he buys Abyssal Mask, and at level 14 you go, bam, here is like 1,500 gold worth of free stats or something. I think Ornn is going to be really good alongside tank supports. And you actually might want to consider giving your tank support your first donation upgrade, because it's going to be honestly to the tune of I'm going to walk it back and say like 1,800 gold. I didn't actually look it up. I probably should have, but I didn't. This is probably about 1,800 gold worth of overall stat gain. 1,800 is high, sorry. 1,500 is actually more accurate. I'll walk that back to 1,500. You're probably still giving about 1,500 gold worth of overall stats to your allies with this kind of upgrade. That is really meaningful. So, really consider this where your tank junglers or tank supports might want to get your first forge upgrade because it's more on them than on your carries. It's meaningful. Next up is Renekton getting some nice cleanup. Be gone decimals. Or at least, a more rational decimal, whatever. This doesn't mean very much. This is a 33% healing increase versus champions. Probably about a 1% win rate bump, which is kind of nice, but he'll be slightly weak overall, but probably a good counter pick. I don't know his matchups, but I'm sure he has good ones. Next up is Sejuani, who is getting quite a bit of damage on the W. This will give her quite a lot of extra power. This is actually, I would say, pretty meaningful. It's like 17% bonus damage at level 1, which is quite a lot. So I'm going to see her clear being a lot better. I'm going to see her fighting be a lot better for a lot of the game. Overall, really substantial buff. She'll probably still be sub 50 win rate, but a lot of extra power for solo queue. And we will start to see Sejuani a lot more in pro play. This is a lot of power. Next up, very big buffs to Singed. I expect them to be above 50% as a result of these changes. Regen is nice. The gigantic buff in the slow is nice. And a really meaningful mana cost on Fling is nice. Singed is back. Singed is very, very strong. Impact Singed might be seen at MSI. We might even see other top laners play Singed at MSI. I think Singed is going to be really, really good. And Singed, by the way, tends to be good into fighters because they need to like run at him and hit him. And all he has to do is just like, okay, you fought me, but I gooped you. Or you fought me, but I flung you. By the way, you're in Poison Trail. And if he has the regen to not get worn down, and he has the mana to keep trading, he's just in a great spot overall. I think Singed is really, really good in this metagame specifically. Let's see what happens. Next up is Trundle. 20 damage on the max rank of Q. 10 seconds off the Subjugate cooldown. Definitely still needs buffs. I'm glad we're seeing monthly Trundle buffs. Overall, he probably still stays sub 50. We're getting closer and closer and closer to a solo queue and pro viable Trundle who is not solely relying on Pillar. And that is a good thing. Zed is on the very much high side win rate wise. Good to see 10 damage off the Q. 2 damage for most of the game off the W. We weren't really seeing Zed in pro play, unfortunately. With these nerfs, we probably won't see him at MSI unless there is some cool counterpick that he's really good into, but I don't know of one. Overall, though, this will nerf him a little bit. He'll still stay above 50%, and Zed will keep terrorizing solo queue a fair bit. Such is life. Cutlass and Rune King, and even slightly Gunblade, just because the build path's a bit harder. getting nerfs here. I think Rune King AD carries were crowding out the other marksmen somewhat. Those are pretty much the top 4 champions were all Rune King champions. So kind of good to see that. IMO, I think it's a positive for League of Legends to see a bit more diversity. That said, solo queue wise, you still have Jinx running around being the highest win rate champion of the game. So, you know, that's a thing. Minor buffs to Bramble Vest being 2 seconds longer on the Grievous Wounds. Cinderhook getting the buff it actually was supposed to have in the previous patch. Thornmail getting the same buff to Grievous Wounds. And Stormrazor getting some extra energized effects. Ultimately, what this comes down to is I don't think these matter very much. These are whatever. That's was talked about last 2 weeks ago. The Stormrazor buff I think is really, really meaningful. I am expecting that Stormrazor 3rd is going to be the go-to pickup on crit marksman now. I think it's very, very, very good. Really, really strong. The item efficiency is actually quite good on this item. You only pay 250 for all of this. 250 gold is not a lot to spend for a passive that good. So I think we should start seeing more Stormrazor in the near future. I'm going to be doing a lot of IE Shiv Stormrazor builds. I think it's going to be really, really effective. Minor change to coup de grace, where it is a bigger damage amp, but overall you don't get the bonus stats on takedown. I like this as a design change. I like that it's more normalized against the other damage amp runes, that it's a bit more easy to aptly compare them and make your informed decision on which rune you want to have. That is a positive. There's some ARAM changes, minor buffs and nerfs. Some of the new items went away. The new Summoner spell went away, and the game-ending changes got brought down a little bit, is what it mostly came down to. That's the patch. I think it's a cool patch. 9.8 is MSI. Stay tuned for that. It's going to be exciting, and I will see you all next time.